Hi, this is Carlo of 4GQ TV, and I'm here with a very special interview. I have Jennifer Stolo, who is the producer and part of Robert Craig Films on a movie called No Address. And Jennifer, thank you for coming on the show and talking to me today. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, great to be here, Carlo. So I'm the CEO of Robert Craig Films and producer, as you said, of our latest project, the movie No Address. We also have a documentary that was a prequel to that called Americans with No Address. I've been here with Robert Craig Films for almost 3 years. My background actually stems in running national, regional, nonprofits, social impact film companies as well as other social impact companies. More recently, before I came here, I was the president and CEO of Make-A-Wish for Northern and Central California and Nevada. And this has just been a wonderful journey for me from, my career spanning about 30 years as a CEO, as a nonprofit, social impact, and really trying to make a difference in this world, one person at a time. And so this amazing job here at Robert Craig Films and this film that we've just done has been able to do that, I think, as well as we've touched the country with our ability to share the no address movement around homelessness.
I want to say that I saw the film and it's very impactful, very emotional. And I'm curious what type of feedback that you've gotten from it so far.
Oh, we've just gotten wonderful feedback. I think when we started this project, we really thought it would just be a low budget film, go straight to streaming. And I think just, by the nature of this topic, and such a national crisis, that it really lent itself to just so much conversation and so much attention nationwide, that we actually secured national distribution. It was in theaters nationwide a couple of months ago. It has now left theaters and is streaming nationally and soon to be internationally. So it's really just been, just such a journey to see this happen. And Carlo, I don't know if you know, prior to this, really, as you saw the movie, right? It's a non-fictional movie. It is based on true events with our wonderful friends, Billy Baldwin, Beverly D'Angelo, Ty Pennington, Ashanti, Xander Berkeley, just an amazing cast. But as we kind of started to look into the script and think about what these stories meant, which are really five different storylines about how one can, fall into homelessness unexpectedly in this case. We decided to kind of take a journey and make sure that this movie was authentic. And in doing so, we actually traveled the country across 18 states, 20 major cities with high levels of homelessness to really study this, what I call the American crisis. And, the goal was to really essentially learn, research as producers to ensure the authenticity of the movie. But what ended up happening was a documentary, and it was just this wonderful prequel to the movie. So Americans with No Address is really a documentary about what's working, what's not working, and how we got here as a country. So there's that piece to it as well.
It seems like it's a crisis that's unfolding, and you feel like it's getting worse every year with job cuts and layoffs, and people just can't be able to afford to pay rent anymore. So, have you seen any successful programs in any cities or trials that have tackled homelessness and that has seemed to work or has some type of promise of working?
Well, I think as we journeyed the country and saw what was not working, certainly, but what was, a lot of it is a lot around community collaboration. It's a lot about opening, our hearts and minds to this situation. It's very easy to judge. It's very easy to pull up to a street corner and say, get a job, this is your fault. But there were so many stories that we learned along the way that this could happen to anyone. I mean, it really could. It could happen to you, I. There are so many individuals that we spoke to, that were lawyers, doctors, just a couple of turns of events in someone's life, this can happen to them. And so what, I really admired was there are so many communities. I particularly saw a number of communities in Texas that came up with just very unique ways of tackling this process, with really strong outreach into the community, building trust among people that are on the streets, creating housing first, and then bringing those wraparound services so that it really was a holistic approach. And I think the places that I saw the most success was really when communities came together, when there was the absence of the NIMBY, not in my backyard, and there was more of an openness to say, how do we come together as a community? How do we bring nonprofits? How do we bring churches? How do we bring the community and elected officials together to solve this? So I don't think there's no one way to solve it, but I think every community has an opportunity to bring compassion and empathy to this situation and find unique solutions. And that's what we journeyed across the country and saw in many, many communities.
How long did it take to film this from conception, like, getting the script done and then going to production and then finalizing the edits? How long was the whole process?
It was about a 3-year process. We started off and we were hit by the SAG strike after we did our first principal photography, first time that we filmed a couple of months into it. And then a lot of times what happens is, you get into the editing room and you realize, we missed this, that, or whatever, and you have to go back and do some pickup shots, which is typical, in production. But when that happened, the SAG strike happened. And so for 6 months, we were unable to go back and do those pickup shots. So we had to stall. But we always say it was a great stall. That's actually when we came to realize that what we had as far as all of the B-roll that we took during the country is that we decided to put together the documentary. And so when the SAG strike was over, we resumed and we had another 10 days of pickup shots. And then there's just a lot of post-production, a lot of editing, a lot of back and forth. You look at it again over and over and over. There's a saying that, at one point it just gets to a point where you're, either out of time or out of money. And so out of time when your distributor says, hey, we're putting this in theaters on February 28th, so you got to hand us over the film. But a wonderful journey. I think because it took so long, which actually is not a long time in production. Many movies take years and years to make. But because it took a long time, it allowed us to really create an incredible awareness, almost what we call a no address movement. From the documentary and the film, while they were being produced, we had so many awards that came forward as far as film festivals for the screenplay, and we had authors come forward and say, I want to write a book. So there is a novel now out there on Amazon called No Address. The experts that we talked to along our journey to make the documentary, they actually came forward and said, we'd really love to help support you in creating a study guide, which I think, back to your question, what are some things that have really helped, in communities? What we found on our journey is that 65% of the organizations that are addressing homelessness are faith-based. So it was a really interesting eye opener for us to see the Salvation Armies of the world, the city gates, the churches. And so our study guide actually is geared toward the faith-based community, almost like a Bible study lesson with 4 sessions, videos. Max Lucado and his production team were involved in the videos. And it's just a really great resource for churches, for example, to know how to really better their homeless ministries. And then another piece of it came forward is that music, is kind of that common language among all of us, right? And music can be so inspiring. And we've had just some beautiful music that came forward in the movie. And Jada Marcus of Rascal Flatts came forward. He has a Red Street Records company and said, hey, we'd love to label and distribute the soundtrack. So we have
Oh,
that as well. And I think, my point is, Carla, it just kept growing and growing, right? Ashanti came forward and said, I'll do the audiobook. And so we have all of these pieces, that really come together. And I think when we set out on this journey to make a film and then became a documentary, then a novel, then an audiobook, then a soundtrack, then a study guide, what happened was it allowed us to speak to so many more audiences. It just broadened this scope of awareness and a real campaign to bring compassion and empathy and humanize this situation rather than criminalize it.
that's certainly something the film did is definitely humanize it because you see different stories of different people. And, I don't want to spoil it for people that want to see it, but it was very interesting to see the difficulties with, let's say, foster homes sometimes. That was portrayed in there. Addictions where you spend money, that was portrayed in there. And it's just interesting to see all that because those are things that happen in everyday life that you might not even think about. Like, you might not think about wasteful spending money on one thing and that it just triples and triples and triples and then all of a sudden you can't afford to pay things. So it was
Mhm.
so unique to see that in there. How did you assemble such a great cast for this? And Was everybody able to film like on the same days, or was the schedule like hectic and everybody had to do like different pieces and here and there?
Yeah, yeah. So, you go out to your great casting agencies. We had a fabulous one in LA that managed most of our lead talent, and then we had a wonderful casting agency here locally because you've got so much background. You've got hundreds of people just in background, which are your, quote unquote, your extras. And so, to assemble, a fabulous cast of, 13 lead cast, which normally you only have two or three, it takes everybody coming together to really be a part of this. I think one of the things that any of our lead cast would tell you now is that they really got involved really for the mission of what we were set out to do, as well as humanize this situation, bring I don't say bring awareness, right? We're all fully aware that 2.8 million individuals in this country are homeless, and more than half of them are children, which is just terrible. But it was about bringing the compassion and the empathy and the humanization. And what I loved is that, Billy Baldwin, he'll be the first one to tell you, he used to be up on the hill. He was, most actors are actors first, then advocates, and he was kind of the opposite. And so he's really been someone that's been deeply involved in the advocacy, of this situation and solutions that are out there. Ashanti and Xander Berkeley and Ty and Billy, they all walked the homeless encampments where we filmed in the Sacramento region. They came early and said, we really, I think at first maybe they thought, they were trying to get into character, and really it was a profound experience for them that they walked encampments, they had conversations, they visited homeless shelters. They really wanted to dive into this. So while we found amazing actors, that are part of Hollywood, we also found amazing people with just beautiful hearts that they, to your question, they came in and they filmed for 2 months, right? But they stayed part of this project up into today, really being a part of it, and to your question, yes, when you're filming, you bring people in on different days. They're in their trailers, holding rooms, different, it's a schedule. It is quite a schedule. You do location scouting, you find all the different locations, you figure out what days you're shooting where, who's in what scenes. And yeah, you create a long schedule of, a good almost 2 months that we did that first go around. And then the pickup shots, about half of our cast came back to do that, which was actually a year later, after the SAG strike, as I mentioned. But quite the coordination, to bring hundreds of people, to a set with all your producers and your directors and but just great people involved. I'm just, so grateful to have been a part of seeing this all unfold.
I want to say that Billy Baldwin did an amazing job in this. It was so emotional seeing some parts of the struggle with the family, and you're looking at that and you're like, he wants to be a better person. Like the acting was so well done. You felt the character. He wants to be a better person, but he keeps falling. He keeps struggling. And you know, his wife in the film bears it for so long until she just breaks down completely. But like all good movies, this does have a redemption story.
Mhm.
And I was glad to see that redemption story because I was so heartbroken to see the family dynamic kind of like break up. And I also saw a lot about faith in here too, where you heard the inner voice of one of the actors say, "Oh, like basically, where is God? He's not listening." And then come to see the end of the film, it's like everybody found a start. Everybody found redemption. And there's something unique about this is that buying the old motel and turning that into a place for homeless people to stay and recoup, that's a great idea. And I hope to see more cities do that. Was that taken from knowledge of your experience dealing with homelessness, or have you seen that in action already?
Yeah, I think back to, what I saw and so much of what we journeyed through is the uniqueness and the innovation and the thoughtfulness, in utilizing spaces that make sense, in your community. I know here in my community, there's a lot of assisted living centers that were vacant. And so they've turned a lot of those into shelter programs, respite programs, different things. So yes, so much of the movie, like we say, it's based on true events. Everything that's in there is a true story that we came across one way or the other. And to your point, Billy Baldwin, yes, he plays a successful businessman. We've seen this many a times, a couple of bad deals, a couple of things that happen in his job, things start to spiral, you lose your job, your marriage starts to fall apart, finances happen. Like that happens all the time, right? Other elements that we put into the film were really about gateways into homelessness. And these are the gateways into homelessness. There is, economics. You've got a foster child. I know here in California, one out of every three foster youth end up homeless in this state, which is just terrible. You see addiction, you see veterans, the struggle with PTSD. And so every storyline in here is what we saw. Every situation that we put into the movie is something that we witnessed. And to your point, while homeless might sound like a dreary topic, the movie really is a drama that portrays hope and redemption. It gives you the bleak realities of homelessness. Everything that happens in there is what happens on the streets. But there is so many beautiful stories, of hope and redemption and people finding their way because of the amazing programs. I think for what we found were nonprofits across this country, which is what we ended up really partnering with, as our audience for, these films, because we found that they were the ones, on the ground doing the hard work, out there making a difference. They were solution based, there was outcomes, and back to my point of 65% of them were faith-based. And to your point, yes, we made it, I say, faith infused. We strung that inspirational faith element through the movie because we found that to be such a redemption piece, of people that journey, through this situation, that programs that really provide that mind, body, spirit, spirituality piece of it, in the recovery process were the ones that were most successful. When churches were involved, when there was an element, spirituality that was available for people in these shelter programs, there was a difference and there was a different feel, when we walked in there too. There was a willingness, I think, for everyone just to bond together and really tackle this solution in their community.
The film portrays something that most people don't even think about when you think about homelessness. You're like, as a person, you look at California and you look at Skid Row, you think of just the tents. But what you don't really think about is the violence against homeless people. Like it's not really publicized. And the movie portrayed that there is some could be violence against homeless people living on the streets or death threats or let's just say extortion. And that's just heartbreaking to see. Do you have any statistics on that or is there any research into that? How much homeless people go through that?
I wouldn't say I would know any specific statistics, but certainly, it's I would say it's a situation of disparity. There's so much fear and way to survive on the street, so to speak. There's just so many things that women, especially, have to endure in order to survive on a street. And I would say this, one statistic is that women are rising, on the street, women and children. And that's something that we saw growing across, California, yes, as you mentioned, but across the United States. And when you have women and children on the streets, it's a whole different dynamic, right? There's just a different dynamic that happens. We did visit Skid Row, that's in our documentary. We did talk that there's a mayor of Skid Row. His name's Kevin, a wonderful man that actually does a lot of good down there and helps a lot of people. But, it's a dangerous situation on both sides. There would be many of your listeners too that would say, I've encountered an individual on the streets that was dangerous to me, right? It's just an unsafe situation. And that's the problem, is that if we can get people off the streets and get them into help, it can make all the difference. The biggest piece is that 75% of those on the streets have untreated mental health. So when we look at this as a homeless crisis, it really is a mental health crisis in our country. That is really what's going on. And then when you look at drugs like fentanyl, that is the most deadliest drug that has ever come to this country. The people that you see walking the streets that look like zombies, that's because they're on fentanyl, and that they just aren't even coherent to be able to make the decisions that need to be made. When someone says, "Oh, they want to be homeless," there's people you can't help because they just want to be homeless. Well, they don't have the sound of mind to even to make that kind of decision. And so mental health is the biggest piece to tackle that will help assist in that violence, the dangerous on, on both sides of the coin, what happens on those streets.
Speaking of that, Philadelphia has a major problem right now with the fentanyl crisis, and I believe I can't remember the name of the street offhand, but I've seen some videos. It is pretty bad. It's really bad, and you could see that there's a lot of mental health issues along that street as well when people get interviewed, and it's heartbreaking. So, for people that may be facing homelessness right now, or maybe on the possibility of homelessness, do you have any suggestions for them on what they can do or how they can reach out to maybe find some help?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think our communities really need to, fund prevention and early intervention more. We should be investing in keeping people housed in the first place, and that really means just, strengthening, eviction prevention programs, rental assistance, access to affordable health care, and mental health services. That's the beginning. It's the prevention and the intervention. If we could work on that more, we'd find a better place. But for those that are facing that, there are so many amazing organizations in almost every single community. I think the fear so often of someone walking into a shelter is that shelters are dangerous or there's rules or, and there's amazing programs in every community that we saw across this country, and I would encourage someone to not be fearful, to reach out for help because the services that they may need might just be that one step that keeps them out of that situation. Their churches, faith-based community centers, shelters, nonprofits. There's a lot of great programs in every single community. And so there shouldn't be any reason that someone can't find somewhere to access, but, it goes back to if you talk to someone on the street, every one of us that can remain in a stable place, it's because we have the love and support, around us. And many times people on the streets, they've lost that. And it takes just one person in one person's life, to help them across that finish line. And many times people don't have that. So I think all of us as a community, need to volunteer, need to, be part of outreach, do as much as we can, just to even look people in the eye as you're walking down the street and say, hello, how are you doing? What's your name? I always tell this one story that really touched me during this project. I was walking down the street and I said hello to a gentleman. I said, hi, sir, what's your name? And he looked at me so strange as if I had asked him the most difficult mathematical question that there was. And I said, I'm sorry, sir. I just want to know your name. I want to just say a prayer for you. And he said, no, I'm sorry. I just was shocked when you asked me that because I cannot remember the last time somebody asked me my name. And I thought to myself, like, oh, that's just not okay, right? Like that's just not okay, as human beings, that we need to be more. We need to do better.
That's a good point. I think a lot of people are afraid to approach people that are homeless because of they might look like they haven't taken a bath in a long time, or their clothes might be ripped, or they look like they're skinny, or they might be suffering from, some ailments. And it's just, it's heartbreaking to see this. Um,
Mhm.
I'm about to get emotional right here. So
Yeah.
it's something that you do that you're doing, and the movie is so amazing that you tackle this and you kind of show the humanity behind it, that every one of these people are human beings just like us, whether they are financially successful, whether they're not financially successful, whether they have faith, they don't have faith, they're all human, and they all feel the same type of feelings of abandonment, uh, love, loss of hope, those kind of things. They go through all those emotions, but people just like to generalize them statistically, at least in the media. They're statistics, they're not people. And that takes away from that humanity that your film brings back to everyone. So I'm very happy that you made this film. Now, I do want to ask you as well. You mentioned that you also had worked with the Children's Miracle Network, and you've done a lot in nonprofit outreach and disability advocacy. How did you get started in all that? Because I know your background is in psychology, and it's almost like psychology to, all of this. Is that what led you here, or have you always been into helping people?
Well, Carlo, I've got six kids, and when they all went off to college and said, "What are you going to get a degree in?" I said, "Go for it. Do whatever you want to do," because when you get out of school, not always does it lead you down the same path. It can, right? If you go to med school, you'll end up probably being a doctor. But I always tell my kids, when one door opens, walk through it. You always have the opportunity to turn around and walk back out. And I think that's what my journey has been. Yes, majored in psychology with a teaching credential. I thought my road was a counselor in education. I got out of school. I didn't want to have to go back home. And of course, I'm going to age myself because this was many years ago. And so I got a job actually as a preschool teacher one summer after I graduated college while I was in a master's program. And little by little, I fell in love with little people, as I would call it. And that started my journey in running child development centers for 10 years. That led me into working for Boys Town and advocating for foster care children, running national and statewide campaigns for them. That took me up to Sacramento, where I joined the California Dental Association. Did a massive statewide campaign raising $40 million for access to oral health care, primarily again around children and families. Again, my passion towards little people, as I call them. And then from there, Make-A-Wish tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we'd love for you to come over and be the president and CEO for us." And that to me was just a dream come true because my mom actually was a pediatric oncology nurse for 40 years, and I had watched her interact with Make-A-Wish children. And it was just a beautiful marrying, I think, of like everything that I had done throughout my career with working with children, advocating for children. And as you deal with children with critical illnesses, that's just a whole different place, and there's just so much that you want to give to them and their family, and to be able to provide just magical wishes for children that statistically would show that they got better. The anticipation of a wish and the excitement of being able to do something you never dreamed you could do or have anything that you never dreamed you could have, changes the mind and body and spirit, of a child. And I watched that firsthand. And fast forward. I walked into this Robert Craig film thing, seeing this as another opportunity to touch more lives. They were in the midst of, really tackling homelessness and finding a way to showcase this across America, humanize this. My husband has been involved as a CEO running homeless shelter systems actually for 10 years. And so my kids and I have been very close to that cause as well, too. And so it was a natural place for me to step into being able to, put my heart, into not a different place, because there's 1.5 million children out there that are homeless. The foster care system, it kind of brought it all together for me. It was the health, the education, the foster care, dental. I mean, everything that I'm doing here and the stories that we showcase and the lives that we're touching, have all been around lives that I've been involved in for the last 30 years. So it was just really a beautiful culmination of my career so far. So, I mean, to your point, psychology has been good all along the way, right? I mean, it was been very useful in my entire career, as you can imagine. But it's the same thing. You walk out of college, you never know where life will take you. And I'm so grateful that I've just had this incredible career that I've been able to wake up every morning and say, I'm going to be able to make a difference in someone's life today. That's a great
It
feeling.
it definitely sounds like you've made millions of differences for millions of people's lives from everything that you've done. Dental health care, homelessness, disability, advocacy, the Make-A-Wish Foundation. It's just come full circle for you in a sense. It's almost like this is your path. It's almost like it's what you're meant to do. And it's so heartwarming to see that somebody so caring is in a position um, that you are, that you're able to do all this. So that's amazing. So I just want to say thank you for all that you do because it means a lot to people like me that see all this and it's rough to see it. And we're starting to experience a homelessness crisis. I want to say in Florida, in some areas, we started seeing more and more homeless in Orlando, in parking lots, and it's something that's not really talked about. The politicians just want to push it under the table, or they'll put those things on the benches so that they can't sleep across them. And it's just like, where's the humanity? How are we going to help these people? And then they pass laws against certain nonprofit organizations from being able to hand out food. And I think to myself, well, then what is the solution? You're passing laws that are just going to make it worse. So what is
Right.
the solution to help everybody? And so now I can't wait to check out some of the material that you have at Robert Craig Films as well, and the books and everything for No Address, because that is very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Check out the documentary. That's a great place, to start. But I agree with you. I've seen cities where I've lived. It goes back to that. Right? There's no reason to turn a blind eye. If there's someone out there in need, let's figure out programs that can help them before it becomes that massive problem. And it takes all. It's a multi-sector, collaboration. It's nonprofits, it's your faith communities, it's your government agencies, it's private businesses. Everybody has a role to play, and I think that's why for us, we really hope through, No Address, we've seen that our storytelling, which is so powerful in general, right? Storytelling in general, but storytelling can bring, these sectors together in ways that inspire and have coordinated, action. But turning a blind eye isn't going to help the situation. All it is doing is worsening the situation. And when people say like, well, we're not handing out food, we're not doing this because it's going to bring them, it's like this statement of it's going to bring them here. No, 9 times out of 10, those individuals that are homeless in your community are from your community. Many times people think that's not true, especially here in California. Everybody comes here because it's warm. If when you do point in time counts and you look at those individuals that are homeless in the majority of your communities, they are from your communities. And so when we think about that, those are our neighbors, those are our people, and we need to care for them. And I appreciate you, Carlo, because when you talk about media can give one perception or a different perception, right? So I appreciate you and the perception that you're giving out there and the perspective of that this is a situation we need to humanitize. There's a lot of things that need to be done, but it is really about humanizing the situation and looking at it differently, shifting the narrative, being able to see this in a different light. And when we can do that, we can all come together and collaborate and find solutions in our community without turning that blind eye.
So, a question I have for you is for people that are seeing this or people that maybe watch No Address and they want to get involved, maybe they have some extra time to donate or they have extra food to donate. What is the best way for them to find organizations that they could reach out to volunteer?
Yeah, so we've actually partnered with 1,500 nonprofits across the country during this process. Ones that we've vetted that we've found to be just amazing programs doing great work. So if you go to noaddressmovie.com and you go to our website, there's actually a directory on there of those 1,500 nonprofits. You type in a zip code or a city nearby, and it helps you find that nearby. And, in the end of our movie, our movie is a call to action, and our actors actually come on screen as you saw, Carlo, at the end of the movie, and really help people to act, in their community because it does feel overwhelming, right? It does feel hopeless when you think of 2.8 million Americans that are homeless. But we can do things, one day at a time, one person at a time, and I say if you are able to, donate, support those organizations in your communities. Like I said, there's amazing organizations that are doing good work. Help support them financially. If you have time to volunteer, not only will it be an amazing opportunity for you to go into an organization and volunteer and help them, it will make a profound difference on you. I always tell people spend 1 hour in a homeless shelter, and I swear it will just change the whole way you think about all of this. Because back to the conversations of this could happen to anyone. I sit down and have conversations with someone that could have had a career just like mine, who happened to have a couple of missteps, whatever that looked like, and here they are. And we have a long, beautiful, intellectual conversation in a shelter. And so I encourage people, go and volunteer because it really will change the way you think about things. And three, back to my, look someone in the eye, say hello, give a kind word, ask someone their name on the streets. You have no idea what kind of difference that may make. I don't know what that difference was when that man said that nobody had ever asked him his name in such a long time that he could even remember. Maybe something changed with him that day. I don't know, but it doesn't take much for any one of us to just be kind. And so there's so much we can do. It's not a hopeless situation.
Absolutely. And for everybody watching this later, go ahead and click the links down below. I'll take you to No Address and Robert Craig Films and all the information here that we talked about as well. And I urge you to try and reach out to some organizations if you have time or you're able to donate whatever way possible, whether it's religious organizations, nonprofit organizations, it doesn't matter. Anything that can help homelessness, mental illness, and disabilities. I highly recommend doing that because it will not only change your life, but it'll change somebody else's life as well.